Kia ora and assalamu alaikum. My name is Tayyaba. My birth country is Pakistan, but I left it when I was 1. So I've grown up in Japan and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And by profession, I work in the industries of migrant and former refugee resettlement in the first world countries. I like to make sure I'm very, very explicit about that. And currently I'm working in the health sector. New Zealand is a great country, without a doubt. But that doesn't mean that your migration experience becomes easy just because it's a great country. Because migration requires social connections. It requires you to feel stable. It also requires you to feel a part and a sense of your culture, which you completely miss in a place like New Zealand. And so my experience both times has not been an easy one. It's felt tectonically isolating. It's been a question of identity both times. You know, what do I really want in life, and is this the place where I'm going to get it? And alongside that, there have been the typical challenges that every migrant experiences, like getting into the employment market. I think a lot of people think for someone like me who's studied here, who went to university here, who's done all of her schooling here, or most of her schooling here, that it's easy for someone like me, but even as an established migrant, it's not. And I think it's really important to know that. I have high hopes for New Zealand in terms of how much it can achieve as a global leader. Can we be really good at how we settle migrants and former refugees here? Absolutely. But I think you need the right people in the right places to be able to achieve that. One of our current struggles in Aotearoa, New Zealand for migrant and refugee resettlement is the idea of representation, but also people feeling like they have gotten their feet on the ground here. If you migrate here and you continue to struggle to land the job that you were doing back home or wherever else you were, and you've had to retrain, or actually find a whole new career path, that's not really going to make you feel like you are A, successful, or B, integrated. And until we change those systemic things, we are quite far away from being global leaders, in my opinion. So I think there are bigger questions that we need to answer as New Zealanders to be able to be those global leaders, but I also genuinely believe we can do that if we have the intention to. I think Aotearoa New Zealand's not so great at, once again, representing diversity of issues in our mainstream media. And I say that knowing that, the Pakistan floods, which is currently our biggest disaster in the world, actually, in terms of displacement and climate change. If you look at the coverage here, it's been dismal, sadly. And yes, we were one of the first countries to respond from an aid perspective, but actually, what have we done to raise people's awareness of what this means, for climate change? The same goes for the many wars in the Middle East, to, what's happened in Afghanistan, to other parts of the world that we just don't really care about as much, even though we will have people from those communities living right here. Sure, they might not be, large scale in numbers, but they are New Zealanders. And if New Zealand wants to be a global player, then New Zealand needs to really share the stories that are global stories. And I think we have a long way to go to do that. We seem to not have the interest in wanting to be connected to the rest of the world. When you look at our media stories and how our media kind of operates, it's really unfortunate, And I get that sometimes it's nice to be isolated and removed from the bigger problems of the world. But how long can you do that before those problems become part of our makeup? And I say that going back to March 15th, for example. Prior to March 15th, most people would have told you that would never happen in New Zealand. But if you asked a Muslim, they would say, yep, I was kind of waiting till something just went wrong. And it goes to show how disconnected we are from some of our communities, and we need to change that. Well, I think women's rights are more important now than they've ever been before, because they're being trampled on in a way that they haven't been before, possibly, So the hijab for me is a very classic example, where you've got the stark contrast of what's happening in places like France, where women don't have the right to wear it, to places like Iran, where women want to have the right to make that choice. So at the end of the day, we're still where we were, essentially, for some women, where their choice is not their choice. And until we get to the point where women have the absolute right to make their choice, we wouldn't really have achieved women's rights the way we want to. So I think they are still very, very important because of that very reason. I think women's rights have progressed for some women, but not all women. And this goes back to how you view the feminist movement, who was involved, inclusivity, intersectionality. I think some women have made it, but only so far, and other women have been left behind. So women of color, Black women, women in certain continents, who really don't have the rights, the basic rights that they deserve. That includes things like your ability to, your fertility rights, your rights to actual things like hygiene, sanitary rights, your ability to make choice around marriage. We are still struggling with all of those rights in certain parts of the world. So I think we have a long way to go. I know that's not the most optimistic answer, but we will get to optimism once we become real about what the problems are and accept that they still exist. I do try and harness the diversity within me daily, and it still is very, very exhausting. So like I said earlier, I make sure that I'm constantly and intentionally engaging with, making friends with people who are different, and learning about the world and learning about different faiths and learning about different cultures and just being comfortable with knowing that other people are not like me. And it's exhausting, but eventually exhaustion becomes like part of your DNA, and it becomes part of your resilience, and it, is natural. And I think I've kind of got to that natural stage now where I am able to go into any space and be okay and not constantly be thinking, oh gosh, am I doing this wrong or am I doing that wrong? And that level of confidence actually is really helpful. I think it's a really important skill for our, young people to have. And I'd really encourage people to kind of constantly try that. So that person that you might not ever really want to have coffee with because, I don't know, they are from a different country, or they might not speak English perfectly, or they're of a different faith group and you have a particular opinion around that faith, actually go have coffee with that person and really get to know them. That's where your growth is.